All right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So, one of the more popular questions that we get today is how do I fill my sales pipeline? Now, there's a number of different ways in which you could fill the sales pipeline, but outbound marketing is one of our favorite methodologies. I want to immediately address a little point of confusion here. People think that outbound marketing is a strategy. And outbound marketing is actually no more of a strategy than somebody saying that inbound marketing is a strategy. Outbound is a category as much as inbound is a category. And there's a ton of different strategies inside of outbound marketing. So, we're going to talk about outbound marketing. We're going to talk about how to make your outbound marketing more effective than it is right now. And I'm bringing two of my heavy hitters on my team who manage a lot of our outbound marketing. They've sent, at this point, probably hundreds of thousands of different emails. We've become experts in understanding what doesn't work and have gotten really good at figuring out what does work. So, without further ado, Zack, Burkes, Jerson, I keep pronouncing your last name wrong, but Jerson M., welcome to the show.
Awesome. Happy to be here. I'm excited, especially to chat it up with Jerson, who's the ultimate expert.
Yeah, Jerson, we've been working together not as many years as I've been working with Zack, but we've been working together for a lot of years. And it's been fascinating to see the evolution of the work that we've done together from the very first emails that you sent to the emails that we're sending now. And so, why don't we talk a little bit, Jerson, in terms of what have you noticed when you started sending outbound emails? And then how has your strategy evolved? And if you wouldn't mind, let's start with what have you learned that didn't work?
So when we started out working, like 3, 4 years ago, we started with email personalization. And there was no AI back then. I was doing manual personalization for all the emails that we were sending out. And at some point, it was working great. We were setting appointments, like 3 appointments every single day because of that one singular email process. And then over time, it just kind of died out. And we've tried several other things to get outbound back up and running. And to cut the story short, we've actually changed our messaging. And I think that's really, if I can attribute the success of our current outbound efforts, it's really the differentiation that we have made with our new messaging, which is so different. We're not selling anything. We are not even talking about ourselves. We simply transitioned to making the recipient of the email being the rock star.
Fantastic. Zach, do you have anything to add? Because I know you've been sending out outbound emails even longer than Jerson. And he did bring in a really key point that you and I have spoken about on a number of different occasions, which is just because it worked once before doesn't mean that it's going to continue working indefinitely. Outbound's one of those things that people tend to copy one another over and over and over again. And once it looks like everybody else's, suddenly it stops working.
I think the thing that stands out to me is what you just said, Charlie, to start the show. I think often people think of outbound as just like cold email asking someone to get on a call. If you just expand or broaden your view to what we are doing now, which there's two things that stand out. One, Jerson is talking about this effort for those that are joining us or listening in, where we are asking someone to kind of interview. We're interviewing them for like a survey or for like a report on the industry, which we will then provide back to them. And so there's like this value, and people want to talk about themselves and they want to learn about their industry. And there's a lot there. And I don't want to take your thunder, Jerson, but that's like one thing. So it's different than what most people I think are doing in terms of just like, let me send a cold email. Hey, you want to hop on a call? Secondly, the other thing that we're doing is that it's very new, but it's already starting to get some results, is using it for a partnership. So not necessarily the end user or your client, your ideal client, but the person that works with your ideal client. And that message is really simple. And we're asking them about like their community resources or like their community that they have of business owners. So those are two different things that are very different than I think what people typically view outbound as, which is, to your point, they started out. So that's what I always think of is like, I think when people think cold email or outbound, they just immediately think, okay, I need to find a list, 10, 15 different titles, whatever, who cares? Someone who vaguely resembles my ideal client. I'm going to send some vague general email that no one can really decipher what it means. And then I'm going to ask them to get on a call. I'm going to send as many emails as possible. and then I'm going to be mad when it doesn't work, even though I just laid out all the reasons why it won't work. We're like taking a different approach to it and saying that we can use cold outbound or cold email to achieve different things that ultimately still help us grow our business.
Let's dive a little bit deeper. So there's the strategy, and you mentioned at a high level an email campaign that you're using to reach partnerships. Jerson talked about our market research campaign, which is another strategy. And there's dozens more different strategies within that. But the quality of your campaign actually starts even before you send out your first email, or the results start even before you send out that first email. So there's a lot of different things that have to go on, from both a preheating element to also a technology element. And so, Jerson, our open rates right now in the most recent campaign is at what level?
We're at 63%.
63%. Now, a lot of people would probably give up their pinky finger to have an open rate of 63%. But that wasn't the case just a few weeks ago. What was our open rate?
We were down to like 30%.
Okay, 32%. So let's talk a little bit about the technology component of it, from domain all the way to how did you get to 64%? Because I know that was a personal project of yours. What did you do?
We had to revisit a lot of our domains, made sure that all the settings are there, the technical setup of it. And once we have ensured that it has all the correct settings, we were very diligent with our warm-up efforts of our domains. So we made sure the warm-up emails were not landing in spam and all that. And then what has greatly increased our open rates is I would attribute to the whole preheating process. So from domain up until the preheating process before we send out that email, we want to make sure that we have several touch points before that email. And so there's at least some brand recognition when someone receives an email from us in their inbox.
And just to also expand, now when you talk about technology, this conversation is a little above my pay grade, but it's the SPF and DKIM, right? You have to make sure that those settings are set up correctly, right? So it's SP, and if you don't know how to do this, you can go on ChatGPT or any one of those other AI tools, and they can talk you through how to set that up. That's make sure on the technology side that it gives you an increased chance of landing in an inbox. But then you talked about warming up the domains. For people who don't know what warming up a domain is and why you do not send from your primary domain. So there's a reason why we don't send from predictableprofits.com, why we send from another one. Could you just let everybody know about that?
Yes, warming up an email domain is simply just letting the email providers know that we are sending from a legitimate email. And how that's done in principle is we have a program that we're using to kind of mimic a real inbox. It's as if a real person is sending out an email, getting responses. Their emails are not being marked as spam, and their emails are being marked as important. And by doing so, we increase our domain health, which means that email providers would recognize that an email from this specific email address that consistently get responses, consistently being marked as important, means that this is a legitimate email. So we increase our chances of what we call inbox placement.
Jerson, you pointed out something to me several weeks ago, and I was of this mindset, and I have sat in many meetings and have been sending emails for years, and for some reason, I still didn't get this. So I think it's worth mentioning. I just kind of assumed that even if we weren't warming or we were doing whatever, if it didn't make it into the main inbox, it was still getting to spam. And you were telling me like, no, that sometimes it doesn't even make it to spam. It doesn't even hit their inbox at all. And so if you're thinking like, why are we doing this, to get to Charlie's original question, if you're starting out like 30% open rate, that means 70% of all your prospects aren't even seeing that message right out of the gate. So that sucks. Like just right away, it's like, here, let's just cut this by 70%. Good luck. And then the remaining 30%, you just hope that they actually read it. So that alone is such a big thing. That's why warming and these things matter. The other thing that you touched on, Jerson, I just want to say real quick, because I've seen it dozens of times with clients. If they're sending from their own domain, they're not taking whatever sort of measures to counter the spam, ultimately become blacklisted, right? Am I correct in thinking that? Which then has real implications across the business. If I'm just trying to send a message to one of my clients, it may not make it to them, right? So then there are like wide ranging implications for this, and why, like, I almost like just go into convulsions when someone tells me like, I'm just sending thousands of emails from my main domain. Like, oh my gosh, like stop immediately. Am I correct in thinking that though? Like in terms of blacklisting and what could happen?
100%. Yeah. we have done recently as well is we started out with the impression, Zach, that email warming is only done when the domain is new. Like when you've created a new domain just for sending cold emails, we thought that the warming process would only last for like a couple of weeks. And then we have learned through testing that we need to consistently warm up domains because eventually, even though we are sending it to a healthy lead list, people would still tend to mark it as spam. And the warm up that we're doing, it counters that. It maintains our domain at a certain level of temperature that we wanted to continuously pump out cold emails.
So we're going from like a setup to like a maintenance phase almost, right? Where we're like maintaining the health of the inbox. Charlie, did we miss anything in terms of just like overall health? I know that's one of the big things you always talk about in terms of just don't send from your own domain. But anything else stand out to you? Also, just kind of the spam, DKIM, and the other things you mentioned. But was there anything else that we might have missed there?
I think it's mxblacklist.com, if I remember correctly. And it's a free tool that you can go put your domain in and just see if it's blacklisted. If it's blacklisted, if it's a cold email or whatnot, you're almost better off just getting another domain. We have multiple different strategies inside Outbound, but also multiple different strategies in the setup phase of the predictable profits operating system. If one domain gets burned, that could shut down the entire strategy. So we want to build robustness into all of our strategies and everything that we do. And so, Jerson, you're currently warming and have at your disposal roughly how many domains?
So we have 8 domains right now.
If it sounds like, well, this must take an army of people, this is all managed by Jerson and getting this all done. He leverages technology as much as he can, but he's got 8 domains. So if one of them gets blacklisted, then he just shrugs his shoulders and sends Joe an email that says, hey, you got to go buy another domain and get me set up for another one. And so the reason why we do that is we're mitigating our risk. This is kind of like we're playing poker here. And you know that there's not 100% odds that you're going to win. And you know that there's going to be some sort of odd in there that you might end up losing. You might end up getting blacklisted. And your odds increase massively when you're sending out emails to a cold audience that have no idea who you are. Your odds get increased massively because I don't know who you are, hit spam. And so with that, you have to run these burner domains. But all companies do outbound marketing. It's one of the things that I learned when I was studying 8, 9, 10-figure companies way back in the day is I learned, wait a minute, these companies have an outbound department and they have an inbound department. You need both. You need outbound and inbound. Now, the reason why that is on inbound, you're waiting for your prospects to decide, I have a problem, and then they find you, and then you enter into a sales conversation. And that's how the inbound works. And that's awesome. But with outbound, you have an opportunity to reach out to them to start a conversation and then bring them to you. So rather than sit on your hands and say, I hope more people find me today, you can take that aggressive response of bringing more people into your sales funnel. With inbound, that can take, we roughly tell people about 90 days to get an inbound strategy that's running, that helps to fill the pipeline because there's a lot of testing, tweaking, energy, and whatnot to get that. But with outbound, you can get started, and by this afternoon, you could already start sending your first inquiry. Now, we have this rule: never try to sell a cold lead. And you guys mentioned earlier this concept of preheating. And Jerson, you said that was one of the major elements that was the difference between the high open rate. So, what are you currently doing in preheating in a way that our listeners can do the same thing in their own business?
So the idea of preheating is we want specific touch points before we send out the email so that when people receive messages from us in their inbox, they would be like, I know this person because I see them everywhere. And so we want to create those touch points that lead or create that kind of experience. And a simple process that we do on LinkedIn is before we send an email to our lead list, we add them on Sales Navigator and we monitor their posts. And what we do is we look at their profiles and they get notifications that we viewed them. We start following them the next day and they get a notification that this person followed you. And then we start engaging with their posts. Doing these things, and we're starting to get recognized by our prospects before we even start talking to them. We may even have conversations in the comment section before we send them that first email. And when we do, it increases the open rate. It also increases the response rate.
And when people get on the phone with you, Jerson, keep in mind this is a quote unquote cold prospect for the very first time. They get on the phone with you. And what is that relationship like?
It is not an awkward relationship like it's a first meeting. It almost feels like, I know a little bit about this person, and it's not anything awkward. It's like meeting of some friends. There's that recognition. They feel that they're not talking to a stranger or a complete stranger. We've started a conversation before we are having that actual phone call.
Zack, when somebody gets on the phone with you and they go, Zack, the four magic words, I see you everywhere. What are your odds of moving them to the next stage in the sales conversation when somebody says, I see you everywhere?
If you think of your own buying habits, you're likely to do some research or look into the person that contacted you. Or if you're just, let's say, I'm going to look for the person that I can know and trust. And if I'm seeing ads from them, I'm seeing posts, I'm seeing comments, things like that, then I'm just more likely to pick them or at least start a conversation with them. One thing that I think you touched on, Charlie, but I would love to put some numbers to this, because I think sometimes if we're adding all this up, we're like, all right, this sounds like it's a lot of money. It really is not, right? In terms of just these campaigns, domains, warming, all that stuff. But also if we think of like preheating, so if we're going to be using a tool like say AdRoll to like send ads to them before we contact them, how much do you think that would cost, like on average, like maybe every day, Charlie?
Right now, we usually start at a baseline of, I think it's $10 for every 1,000 matched or 10,000 matched, something like that.
I think at some point I was seeing that we were spending maybe $2-3 a day. When I tell people that number, they're like, oh, like, yeah, I could do that, right? Because maybe there's this thought that ads are just really expensive. I got to spend thousands of dollars. No, not really. It could be like $2-3 a day, 30 days. You run the campaign. It could be pretty simple stuff, and it has a pretty outsized impact on the results. I like to point those things out because I think sometimes there can be this misconception that it's really expensive, or it's just a lot of work, or there's tons of tools. And something like AdRoll can get these things just quickly fired up, and you can start doing this. And I'm not an ad expert, and I can do it. So I think that's such a critical part of this kind of campaign, and it's pretty straightforward to do.
Let's think about this for a minute, right? We're talking preheating on LinkedIn, like Jerson just mentioned. You're giving them likes, you're giving them engagement, you're giving them dopamine hits, you're giving them so much before you ask them anything and starting conversations. Magic. Then to your point, Zack, you're going to places like AdRoll. You can even step it up a little bit more and go on the other ad networks that allow you to upload a list through you take a CSV file of all your leads, you upload them inside of these platforms, and you're only going to show ads to those people on the list. You can do it on LinkedIn, Google AdWords, YouTube, a whole bunch of different places. So is it worth it? I had an agency CEO reach out to me and said, what can we do to improve our outbound? So again, we have to do this full diagnostic to figure out what's working, what's not working. There's a whole bunch of other different things that we have to look at. And one of the things that we realized, the majority of the time, the reason why the outbound marketing isn't effective is because they haven't done preheating effectively. Their preheating is garbage. We address the preheating, and then we start to notice that everything else takes a lift. And so we gave them this concept of the four magic words, I see you everywhere. So literally, they started running retargeting ads on AdRoll, LinkedIn, Google Ad Network, Bing, Taboola, Outbrain, X or Twitter at the time, and everywhere you can imagine, they were running ads. And in a short order, and like in a matter of days, their response rate went from 0.5 to 5%. Think about that. In the beginning, because they didn't know what was wrong, they kept changing their messaging, figuring, well, it has to be our messaging. Then they kind of figured, all right, well, we're going to change our target market. We need to just send more. But there's a lot of different reasons why something might work and why it might not work. Preheating, though, is one of the most common areas of opportunities that people aren't doing that create a massive lift. And that means that if I'm going to send a message to, say, one of Zack's partners, usually when you deal with those big companies, it's decision by committee. So I'm not just going to send an email to one or retarget one person. I'm going to figure out who's in the decision-making committee And I'm going to make sure that every single one of those people are added to LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and every single one of those people are seeing my ads as well. So that when eventually it makes it to the committee, they already know who we are. Familiarity helps to create that trust. So super powerful stuff, but that's one area. Jerson alluded to earlier as well about the importance of the messaging. There's one thing that most people overlook, and Zack and I talked about this the other day. If I could send, God could come down and write a cold email. He could write it, it could be perfect, the best thing in the world. But no matter how good that email is, they're going to go where, Zack? Before they agree to jump on a call with you, where are they going first?
Your socials, probably. Most likely LinkedIn, your socials, and just kind of do their due diligence, even if it's just a couple seconds, just a quick glance on Google. Most people, they try to like hide the fact that they do that. Yeah, people are looking you up before they get on a call.
Didn't you just tell me a story this morning about somebody who went in your profile and read some posts and whatnot?
It was actually part of this outbound strategy. So Jerson and I are working on a partnership strategy. We are running this partnership campaign. I reached out to this woman, and I also sent a connection request on LinkedIn. Prior to even seeing the connection request, she had looked at my profile because she received the email and saw one of my posts about my dog, and she really enjoyed it and was like, I really like the post, would be happy to help, whatever. I'm not saying that was like the thing that won her over, or she was just like, wow, that dog is so cute, I'm happy to hop on a call. But it like humanized me, I think, in a sense, and made me feel like a real person who's actually reaching out and not just, and that's, we're not even talking about the messaging that I sent. That was very conversational and personal, but a brief message that seemed like Zack had actually reached out. Then she went and looked at my LinkedIn profile, saw the post, and like connected the dots, like, this guy's a real person, right? So I'm happy to help. So yeah, I do think people will look you up and go that path. So you have to have something there.
I think it was LinkedIn that put out a data point that said 86% of millennials and Gen Z will look at somebody's LinkedIn profile before agreeing to get on the phone with them. And so that's really important. So if I go to your LinkedIn profile, am I going to see a professional banner image, or is it going to be a waste? What does that say about your company? Look at it like a billboard on the side of the highway. But what would that billboard look like? That's the banner image. Do you have a professional photo? What is the title? How many people? We've trained a number of different sales teams and whatnot. And when we look at the title and they say sales development or whatever, right in the title, it's like sales rep. That's basically saying, please don't reach out to me. You know what? It's so funny. They don't want to be so obvious about it. I'm a salesperson, right? But they want you to be a specialist of sort, or a consultant, or something along those lines. You're still the salesperson, but people no longer using your grandfather's sales playbook. Like, your grandfather's sales playbook is call the salesperson. They'll tell you everything that they need to know about the company, about the product, about the service. Like, call the salesperson. They'll educate you. At this point in the game, they've already gone. In fact, I think there was one data point that said 96% of all the buying research actually happens before they agree to get on the phone with you. In fact, I'll bet you in most cases, if we were to run a poll, they would know more about your company, about your competitors, about your competitor offerings or whatnot than the salespeople. So it's like, knowing that data point, Zack just said, that people are going to check you out. If your response rate is low, maybe it has everything to do with you're in the sales prevention department, meaning that people are checking your LinkedIn profile, they're going to the website, and they realize there's nothing different about you, there's nothing unique about you, there's no advantage. I'm not going to waste my time.
I think you bring up a good point. I think the purpose of this podcast really is, so if you're running kind of standard run-of-the-mill type of campaign that's very direct, hey, do you want to hop on a call? What do you think the percentage of people who will respond to that at most is? Like, that's ready to buy right now? What is it, like 3 to 5%? Isn't that kind of the stat that's out there? So all the things that we're telling you right now, from Jerson's technical advice in terms of domains, warming, doing all those things, to then preheating, to then having a LinkedIn profile that's legible, that stands out. All these things are just kind of like improving incrementally. But when you stack that all up, you could then go from 3 to 5% to say 35 and beyond. You're just increasing your odds of success. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do here when we think of these different things, is that it's never going to be this 100% success rate where everyone responds. That's not going to happen. But if we can think of it as like, how do we improve incrementally, then we can have more success down the road. So like the LinkedIn profile makes sense. That's what I think of when I think of this message, and ultimately what we're trying to accomplish is just kind of incrementally increase.
You hit something that's so spot on. You talked about the incremental improvements within the predictable profits operating system. In the scale part of it, there's a strategy we call the OSI method. And it's how we've been able to keep companies growing month after month, year after year. And the O starts with optimization. And the key thing for everybody to know is that when you have a strategy, it's never the whole thing that doesn't work. So when somebody says outbound doesn't work, they're saying everything in outbound doesn't work. So we go through this diagnosis of what we call our check engine lights. And we start saying, let's look at every variable that impacts the success of an outbound campaign. And let's either green light it, yellow light it, or red light it. What works, what doesn't work. And we go through the whole thing. And if it's like, okay, well, the technology is set up right, it's not blacklisted. Okay, so you listen to this podcast, you're doing the preheating, you're doing all this other stuff, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, let's take a look at your audience. And Jerson can tell you firsthand that, let's say, whether or not we are sending messages to, say, IT consultant, or we're sending messages to agency CEOs, it's a very dramatic response difference. So there's been audiences that you've reached out before where you could have drawn the conclusion that the outbound strategy does not work at all. And that's because if we looked at everything checked the box, everything was working. But the biggest problem was just the audience. The audience is what didn't work. Then you changed the audience, and the audience itself, all of a sudden it was like boom, boom, boom. It was a much hungrier audience. Now you could say, well, Charlie, was it the audience? Was it the fact that IT consultants don't want to buy business coaching and they don't respond to outbound marketing? Or was it the fact that your message didn't resonate with the IT consultant? And more likely than not, it was the message didn't match with the IT consultant. And so you can't take the same target market and give the same message, because you may have a message market mismatch. If the message meets the market's needs, concerns, you're going to have that increased response rate. But what I will say, if it smells like marketing and if it looks like marketing, it's going to be treated like marketing. And so that's where having that really authentic type of connection works out that much better. I also want to talk about one other key component in the limited time that we have together, and that's the importance of omni-channel. If you think that you're going to turn around and you're going to run an outbound campaign, and you're just going to put everything on email and blast it out, well, chances are your response rate won't be that good. But when you think about omni-channel and all the different ways that you can connect and you can reach with people, we've talked about LinkedIn, we've talked about the ads, we've talked about emails. People will often think that outbound calling doesn't work, that cold calling doesn't work. I ran a test. We had 2 separate campaigns, one with phone calls and one without phone calls. And this was because we had a client that kept saying outbound calling doesn't work. But we're a big fan of reasons and results. The only thing that matters is the results. The one who made phone calls said, okay, I got 0 people answering the phone. This is over a 1-month study. 0 people called me back. And so therefore, outbound cold calling doesn't work. That was a conclusion. But would you believe that they set 400% more appointment than the people who didn't call? That's because when you understand the mindset of the buyer, it's like, I might not return your phone call, but I've seen you, I've heard you, I've read your email. The 4 magic words, I see you everywhere. So they're hearing you and so forth. One of my favorite things to do on LinkedIn, and you can do this if you're a first connection, you can actually send LinkedIn voicemails. So if you're a first connection, and you're able to send a LinkedIn voicemail, they can hear you. Or you can send videos over LinkedIn natively, that just by pressing a little camera and shoot a little video. You can do that natively through LinkedIn. So you're giving them just another way to engage and listen to you. And LinkedIn voicemails are such a ninja technique right now, because most people are going, what are you talking about? I don't know. I've never heard that before. I've never seen it. They've never gotten a LinkedIn voicemail in their inbox. So when they see it, it's a curiosity. They're going to have to press a button. They're going to want to listen to it. And there's all these like cool things. We're running a LinkedIn live event coming up soon. That's another thing that we're testing. What do you think that's going to do to the show up rate?
Yeah, I think it would probably increase it.
Yeah. Now, let's say we're a first connection, Zach. We're doing some prospecting. We're a first connection. And if the salesperson leaves a LinkedIn voicemail, hey, Zach, I see we're scheduled to talk later today at 3 p.m. Really looking forward to seeing you. I Again, it's just a different touch. It's a nice, warm, friendly way of standing in front of people. And you're already telling people before you started a work relationship, this experience will be different than anything else you've experienced before. Because as we've started this relationship, you're already noticing that how we're starting the relationship is different than any other relationship you've ever started before. It's pretty wild how all that works.
Yeah, I find that people also respect a process that goes a little bit further or is different or unique. So if you can have the multiple touch points through a cold outbound campaign or on the back end, if they've like agreed to it, again, you're just kind of annually increasing the chances of success, which is ultimately what we're doing, right?
Absolutely. All right. So I know we're pushing against the clock and you guys have some pretty busy schedules here. So I'm going to ask my favorite question that I love asking on this podcast. So this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. When it comes to outbound marketing, what would you say is your best tip to finding success with outbound marketing?
Biggest and best tip, I think I tend to jump from thing to thing on like the messaging, which is funny because we didn't touch on that at all really today. But I do think it's really, really important. And what I'm seeing is that the short, condensed conversational stuff just works a lot better than the long. And I think that's always kind of been the case, but I think it's been exacerbated. AI is amazing. I love AI. We use AI all the time for all different sorts of things. But it's kind of like your analogy, like you need to use it as like the paintbrush. And I think sometimes people use too broad of a paintbrush to write their messaging. And so it's just very vague and long and using words that nobody really uses. As you guys both know, I hate the word delve because that to me just like keys like you're using Chat GPT. And so I think like I've been working with Jerson and Tom on our messaging, and it's been just really, really short, curious to learn more about your community. And then like that's it, like just one sentence plus like another sentence that's really short and kind of breaking it up and make it seem really. So that's kind of my big thing right now is that if you're having difficulty and you've done all of these things, the settings, the domain, the preheating, all that stuff, either look at your messaging or as Tom, if Tom was here, really look at that list and do some research. Do they make sense? Can you see yourself working with them? Can you see them choosing to work with you? And just be honest with yourself, because I think sometimes people get these lists and there's just too much fluff to it.
Wow. Okay. So big tip. And I think this is probably one of the things that we have really hammered on when we started changing our approach to outbound. And Charlie, when we started working, we had this mindset that the whole purpose of preheating, the whole purpose of the touch point, the whole purpose of sending the email is to set an appointment. And the biggest change from that time that we did was to shift the mindset of we are doing all of these things to start conversation. And the metric or the tracking of that did not even lead to like the number of appointments you've set, but rather the number of conversations you've had. Because eventually these conversations led to the appointments down the line. But that mindset shift that we're engaging with people's posts, we're liking their content. It's not to set an appointment, it's to start a conversation.
I love that point. That is such a good one that I think people need to adopt for sure.
Yeah, but Jerson screwed me because now I have to follow that. I mean, come on now. That was phenomenal, Jerson. That was, but you're right. If you think about it, so much of business is much like interpersonal relationships. We call it client relationships. And if you're going to start a relationship with somebody, the first thing you're going to say is, hi. And you're going to just start a conversation. And then from there, you'll develop a little bit of rapport. But it's the same thing. Too many conversations, salespeople that are struggling, it's because right off the bat, they're going, I want you to commit to something. Let's jump on a long conversation, whatever that might be. Too transactional. I think just to add one more thing to what Jerson and Zack said, both excellent tips. It would just be, so preheating is a big one, but I really want people to understand if you're struggling with your outbound marketing, more likely than not, it's not the whole thing. More likely than not, you're doing a lot of things really, really, really well. There's just a few little tweaks inside of your existing strategy. You should be able to take a campaign that might be subpar to turning that into something that could set a pretty consistent cadence of opportunities for yourself. So that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. For more tips, strategies, and information for creating predictable profits in your business, visit us at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. Let us know if you decide to jump on a call. Let us know that you listened to this episode on outbound marketing, and we'll provide you with a few other tips and strategies and whatnot to be able to support you along that journey. And chances are, without any luck, you'll actually have that conversation with our man, Zack, over here. So it's been an honor and a pleasure to be here with my friends and my coworkers, Zack and Jerson. And I will see you in another episode.